This is a That's It, That's All bonus. A conversation with one of the most transformational of Pacific Island leaders of the past half century. Only 8 people have held this office. Former Guam Governor Felix P. Camacho is our guest. He shares his view on the current state of Guam, faith, and decision making in government. You are listening to That's It, That's All bonus.
You are listening to That's It, That's All with Eulogio Gumataotao.
Hello there. You are listening to That's It, That's All with me, Eulogio Gumataotao. The podcast is brought to you by our friends at Get LLC. They are a business consulting and specialty construction materials and supplies firm in Micronesia. Do you need support in writing your business safety plan? Do you need energy efficient upgrades to your commercial facility? Get the answers right now from Get LLC. You can find out more about them on the World Wide Web at get-guam.com. Please check them out today. Hello to those listeners checking out the podcast in Raleigh, North Carolina. Also, greetings to those of you listening in Wahiawa, Hawaii. With each episode, the listenership is growing to include those now listening in Tempe, Arizona. Can't forget the listeners across my island home, especially those up the road in Jonia. Half a day to you all. That's It, That's All has a very simple format. The podcast is designed to keep you company as you go from one end of Paradise, Guam to the other. Remember to download the podcast as you sit down in front of your desktop or laptop computer right before that next gym workout or run on the roads here or abroad. Thank you to our friends at redcircle.com in pushing out the podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Amazon Music. Also, you can find That's It, That's All on the iHeartRadio app and Pandora. The podcast is also on the KOAM Podcast Network, the best in original programming from the number one source for news and information in Micronesia. Like, subscribe, or follow the podcast right now on your favorite podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts. Click those buttons right now. A very special bonus. A rare interview with the 6th governor of the U.S. territory of Guam, Felix P. Camacho. We dive into his take on the impact of faith in today's Guam and the complexity of decision-making in the island's executive branch of government. The Father Duenas Memorial School and Marquette University graduate had a storied career in public service, first as a cabinet member under former Guam Governor Joseph Atta in the late 1980s, and then served as a tenured lawmaker in the Guam legislature. The collective experiences led to a successful 2 terms as governor that started with his election in the year 2002 and re-election in 2006. The former Guam Governor, Felix Camacho, gracious with his time and always willing to share his perspective on the issues of the day. Where do we start? As a dad, as a brother, as a son, as a grandfather today, and as a private citizen, where do you feel or what do you see is the state of Guam today?
Well, thanks, Sean. It's very interesting. I can try and bring in the perspective I have of being a former leader in public policy, in running the executive branch of government, also being involved in lawmaking, but then also in the private sector. And so I've been far removed now from public life. It's been a dozen years or so since I've stepped out of office. And I'd have to say that I believe the state of our island is very, very complex right now. There are many issues that we're being faced with, unlike anything we faced perhaps since World War II. And I think of the generation of my parents and all they had faced, because life as they knew it was completely changed. And I think we're also going through that same type of thing under a different scenario. Of course, they had to deal with the physical destruction of our island, the violence of war, death, and And now, of course, we've been faced with this COVID-19 issue and death at a certain level, also isolation. And so there are many parallels that you can see here locally, nationally, and internationally that has changed life from what we knew and how we've had to adapt to it. So the state of the island, I think, is very, very different now. Something that no one could have expected
Right.
more than a year ago.
Yeah, that expectation, I think we kind of go about our way and thinking, at the time right before the pandemic and right before March of 2020, things seemed to be kind of just moving right along. I think most of our industries were seeing very high levels, a lot of excitement in the air, and then all of a sudden just completely stopped.
Exactly. If you think of the economy, tourism, of course, was one of the mainstays.
Right.
Military is up and running, of course. They've got the military buildup, and I think over the course of the next 10 years, it's going to be a tremendous amount of money being invested into the island and the buildup of that. But the trickle effect and how the monies or revenues would trickle down into the local economy remain to be seen. But those employed in the federal government as civil service employees, those employed with the military, there seems to be they're in good shape. Guam employees, they've received their paychecks. But the private sector, I think, has really, really suffered. Many businesses have been shut down because of the quarantines and the need to separate and social distancing. The net effect of that remains to be seen, but there have been many people that have been unemployed and of course, receiving PUA and other federal assistance. The desire to go back to work has been greatly diminished, and we'll see what happens when all this is over. I'm afraid that there could be a great tsunami of course, homelessness. The fact that they will not be getting federal assistance means they got to go back and seek work. But many of the businesses are now shut down. So how the government, how the policymakers are going to deal with this remains to be seen. But I see some trouble ahead.
Yeah, the isolation, I think you talked at the very beginning. It's, as a community, the pandemic did force us to stay away from our families and friends. When you kind of look at over the last year and change, in your own dealings, whether it be friends and family, was that one of the bigger, I guess, problems that this whole, yes, with our isolation from World War II was very unique, but this one, you mentioned it earlier. Can you just maybe explain a little bit more about that isolation and what you saw?
I think that many families have had to adapt to being together. Most times they're busy going about their lives, and but I think there's evidence of many people being depressed. When you factor in also the closure of churches, of the gathering of even the faithful, that the ecclesia, the gathering of people in their worship of God, and the ability to hold each other up was taken away. Many freedoms were denied, and I'm talking nationally and also locally. And so I think the increase in drug abuse, in domestic violence, in many other areas has drastically increased. But also it brought many families together. Those that were good and had a solid foundation of as family, they were able to come together in ways they haven't done so in many ways. But I think that the mental, the psychological, and many other issues are where this isolation has caused great harm. But of course now, the governor's decided we're slowly opening up. Businesses are starting to come together, and there's a great anxiety for people to just, should I go? Is it safe? If we reach herd immunity, there's a lot of fear still that's out there, and fear paralyzes. That's one thing that national media, I think, has been very, very effective in, is for good or bad. But the way that they've put this thing out with this pandemic and the COVID-19, the great fear that it created throughout society and throughout many communities, and how government was then able to come in and say, we're shutting down and you're being isolated, and businesses businesses have to close, and there's not going to be any mingling of people until we reach herd immunity and everyone is vaccinated, and on and on and on. This whole narrative has been well played out in national media.
Right.
And sometimes at least in my case, I wonder, where's the truth in this all?
Yeah, the truth is hard to find when it's buried in what would be mired as, in some cases in the media, of like perpetuating a message that was counter to maybe the one that they didn't want.
Mm-hmm.
And you're absolutely right. I would say locally, not so much fear, but more advocacy, because in this community,
mm-hmm.
the information was just trying to get out to get people to do an action, which is so far removed from what happened in the U.S. mainland.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think people here especially are like, we're going to cooperate, we're going to listen, we're going to do what we feel or what they say is necessary, and let's cooperate. And so for the most part, I think Guam has been tremendous in that regard. But again, I think the net effect of it remains to be seen. We're just coming out of this isolation, and we'll see where we go from here.
This podcast is sponsored by Get LLC, a consulting and specialty construction materials and supplies firm. Since 2012, they have provided valuable services to their customers across Micronesia and North America. Check them out on the World Wide Web at get-guam.com. They have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Get LLC. Find out today how they can best serve your business's specific needs.
We were talking about a bit earlier about freedoms that were taken away, and one of the big ones you mentioned was our faith and religion. When we think of faith today, and we think of the issues that are facing not only our community but the world community, how important do you feel that faith really plays a role in the things that we should be doing in our society?
Yeah, things have. When I think back on what happened in World War II, my mom is 92.
Mm-hmm.
She's going on 93, and I asked her, "How did you deal with all that the war brought? Your lives were disrupted. You've lost your livelihood, your homes. You've lost everything. You're herded together down by Menengun and eventually liberated. You've lost family members. People were killed in war, and how did you deal with it?" And she says, you never really know about what tomorrow will bring. In fact, in the Bible, there's the Apostle Matthew in his book, chapter 6, verse 34 says, "Therefore, do not be anxious about tomorrow, for tomorrow will be anxious for itself. Sufficient for the day is its own trouble." Meaning that don't worry about tomorrow. Tomorrow's problems will come. Worry about today and the issues of today. And I think there's a big difference between planning and worry. Planning is time well spent. You think about your schedule, about your goals, about the steps that you need to take, and then you're trusting in God's guidance, and that's where the faith comes in. And that's proper planning. That's time well spent. Worrying about tomorrow and what tomorrow will bring, I think affects your relationship with God. It also means that it's time wasted. So proper planning will reduce anxiety. And I think those that have faith in God and trust in Him, that there are circumstances and issues beyond our control, but trusting in Him, doing what we need to do, asking for His guidance in how we go about our lives and working with other people and caring for our family, it makes a big difference. And I feel sorry for those that don't have a faith in God, that would rely on their own strength, their own intelligence, their own resources, their own talent, to take on the challenges of the world. Means that they're totally on their own. But if you have faith, you are reliant on a greater power, on trusting in God that things will work out, and so you have hope. So I always believe that if if you've got hope, you've got something to hang on to. If you don't have any hope, if you don't have any faith, then you're just dealing with the issues that come day by day, and that can beat you down.
And it's interesting how you say that, because in people I've talked to from Manamco, especially even in these very extraordinary times, and my wife and my kids, when we think about the situation that we face, and many times, and some of this discussions went, well, this is God's plan. He is looking at what's happening, and maybe this is a result of the things that we as a society have done. I know it's not lost on my family, and I know it's not lost on yours. And I talk to folks, and there's interestingly how, as a community, we try to draw a comparison, and in some cases we have, but in many respects, it's far from it.
Yeah. I just have to say that we have to learn from the past. We're not the only ones who have suffered.
That's right.
There are
the whole
other
world.
generations
And
that
generations,
have suffered,
yes.
and you can look around the world, and really, when you think of Guam as a community, this is a really special place. Sean, I know that you've looked at issues that are happening elsewhere, throughout the Middle East, throughout Africa, what's happening in North America, South America, Central America,
Right.
Throughout Asia, and there are so many things that are happening. There's the issues are extremely complex, and how are they dealing with these? When you read and listen to the news, again, I'm always curious about what is the narrative that they're pushing. I think that investigative journalism is not the same as it used to be.
Right.
It's now when you talk about truth, and that's what Jesus talked about. He wanted to reveal the truth to the world and bring the good news. But now people define truth as their own reality, and they determine what is true to them and what they believe and accept, and they act upon that. But that's just, again, based on an individual basis. There's no commonality. There's no real bedrock foundation upon which they then act. So I think we have to learn from what's happened in the past, and generations and after generation, on how did they deal with issues, how did they deal with life in general, and how do you go about your life. There's so much, and so what's relevant to me, of course, is my mother and that generation we call the greatest generation, and how they dealt with everything, and the answer is always consistent to them. It's like, by the grace of God, I'm still here. By the grace of God, I'm still alive. Thanks for His mercy that we're still here, and I just trust in God that He got me through it. And like I said, although there are parallels that can be drawn between now and all that we're facing, and what happened with them during World War II, we can learn from that. And I think the bedrock and the foundation of it all is they had faith in God, and that made the difference in their lives.
Speaking of that faith, it seemed like for many, including myself, we're looking to services, trying to go, and I don't mean like I need to go get a shot or per se, or I need to get a doctor, even though probably could have, should have, would have, but it was about church, about those things at the basic of my life. In my village and in other villages, I've talked to a whole bunch of different people, and they all agreed that by not being able to be there, or the kind of the variations really impacted their worldview, but only they kind of came back to the square one, which was my worldview has to go back and faith has to be in the center. Did you see that with maybe in yourself and maybe others of your church or other folks you might talk to?
We were able to communicate through Zoom.
Oh yeah,
and then
of course, add Zoom to the whole list too.
Yeah, but when we're able to then gather, other than the formality of religion and going into church,
process.
I really think it's the ecclesia, the body, of people of faith that would gather together. And I tell you, I meet with a group of men. We've done this weekly, on a Tuesday morning, and others on a Saturday. And also I'm in this ministry of we call it Friends in Need, preparing food, gathering resources to feed the homeless.
Okay.
And they would go right now in our Tamuning group. We're feeding about an average of 60 meals on a Saturday.
Oh, wow.
But it's a gathering of men and being able to share the challenges we face, and discussion, of course, is always based upon the gospel of Jesus, and the good and the New Testament, the good news, and even the Old Testament. But it's amazing how when you come together, you find strength, and hope, and there's positivity coming out of that, instead of just taking everything that is so negative out there and absorbing it into your life. It can really bring you down. But I'm making a lot of reference to the ecclesia, because the formality of church is one thing, and they shut that down. But the ability for men and women to communicate and share what's going on in their lives and how they're dealing with it, and tie that in with their faith, is I think was a difference maker for me and my friends and our families.
This podcast is sponsored by Get LLC, a consulting and specialty construction materials and supplies firm. Since 2012, they have provided valuable services to their customers across Micronesia and North America. Check them out on the World Wide Web at get-guam.com. They have a presence on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram too. Get LLC. Find out today how they can best serve your business's specific needs.
So, complexity in issues. Things aren't your garden variety disaster, garden variety problem based, whether it's making a cup of coffee or maybe guiding an entire government to do a specific action. I was going to ask you, when you think about in your previous life, in leading the government of Guam, the executive branch specifically, and you think about the complexity of issues at that time, and then today what you're seeing, is it fair to say that over time, which is kind of passes with each day, that complexity of issues is also changing too?
Oh, absolutely. I remember a conversation I had with an old man who was asking me how it's going, and I said, things are pretty tough. Came into office, the island was destroyed by a super typhoon, and I began to present a laundry list of issues that I had to deal with. And he says, "Governor, you have no right to complain. You asked for this job. We voted for you. So go do the job, and just stick at it. Just do your job." So I said, "Thank you very much." That was a real sense of reality. And but I've also come to recognize that with my successor and then the current governor also, that the issues that we face they evolve, they change. You've got your basic, core issues: public safety, health, and education. Those are always going to be here.
Right.
You've got the people, homelessness and poverty, crime, drugs. Those issues are always there, but the complexity of the issues that current Governor Leon Guerrero was dealing with is unlike any of her predecessors, myself included, have had to deal with. That coupled with the fact that I mentioned there's a certain narrative. I think when you think of the legacy news media outlets, you've got MSNBC, ABC, CBS,
the national media.
Yeah, CNN, Fox, the national media, and how they present the narrative and what's going on out there. You can drown in it pretty much.
That's right.
I tend to like to look at what's happening with BBC, even NHK, a few other international news outlets, and see what they're saying, and even Newsmax, a few other things that are up and coming.
Right.
Get onto Rumble and a few other things and see what's going on out there. But all of this is now compounded even more so by the emergence of social media and the availability of people to come out and form their own opinions and get it out there. And so influencers are what they're called nowadays, right? Who get out there and begin to, they've got such a following on Facebook, for
Right.
example, or Pinterest or whatever it may be.
It's probably on Pinterest or even TikTok too. So
TikTok,
it
yeah.
wouldn't go far.
Exactly. So but they're influencers and so you've got independent individuals out there now through social media that really compounds a certain issue and makes it even more complex. Because most politicians are concerned about what are the mainstream media saying, what do the general population feel about one issue or another.
That's right.
And they tend to react to that instead of working on what are the real policy issues, what is the core issue that we need to deal with here and now, and then with lawmakers make policy based on that. So it's very reactive in many cases, but typically now, but now, we've had this real issue of the pandemic and COVID-19, and it's a great impact not only locally and nationally, but internationally.
Yeah, and when you go back to the idea,
Yeah.
just think of when you were governor. The news cycle literally was only from maybe 6 to 6.
Mhm.
Let's be honest.
Yeah.
But then just maybe in the first year of your term, it exploded to the 24-hour news cycle. And near the end of your term, that 24 hours, you were wondering, like, is this guy or these guys ever going to go to sleep? And now today we're up against, and the current governor of Guam, and actually every governor in the country is now up against this new emerging, I guess, call it social media. It's a new wave of information. And if the influencers have more, they're getting more information from your traditional guys, because the influence that they once wielded 5 people maybe is now wielded by hundreds.
Yes.
And your concern is, I think it's warranted.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you think about all that's also happening, aside from government, aside from the economy, there seems to have been an emergence now where there's a great divide in the nation, and it's trickled down into Guam.
Sure.
The BLM movement,
Right.
This accusation of racism, the growth of socialism, and now the I guess this seemingly strong trend of liberal left-wing type of movement.
That's right.
That is bringing America to the brink of absolute socialism and big government, big brother control over most aspects of our life.
Right.
In addition to that, I'd like to also point out the influence of some industry that are protected by law. We're talking Facebook. We're talking, all these other mediums now that really have affected, as I said, social media, to the point where Big Brother or government seems to be tied in with these great influencers in social media that can say, hey, we're going to shut you down. We're going to take down your site. You said something that is insightful. You said something that we don't agree with. You may say that you've got your amendment, First Amendment right of free speech, but we're taking it away because we don't agree with what you're saying. And so there's a lot of movement that again, we'll see how does government react to all this. Because if they can do it to one group of people that may be considered to be oppositional right now or not in alignment with what they feel in their narrative, it's only a matter of time before it swings towards them, to everyone else, and then each of us individually. So I think freedom and what America has been known for and fought for is what's under attack. And then you see what's happening also on the border with the mass migration from over 120 different countries coming through the southwest border.
That's right, all of South America trying to come into the Texas and the like.
So there's going to be amazing demographic changes happening in America, and so this narrative of racism and all how it plays out is going to be very detrimental, I think, to America
And we
as
think
we
of,
know it.
and we think of complexity when you start to add different people, even though it's still the strength of America.
Yeah.
I think I've heard, and I would probably stress it myself, that
Mm-hmm.
our democracy is one of the strongest in the world, if it's not the strongest, and we're still having growing pains.
Yes,
and I
yes.
think there's been this loss of that because of the complexity that's facing, whether it be different folks wanting to see freedoms or social media and the like. It seems that and in also obviously in a pandemic and then resources that are kind of gripping us. We think of the idea that of our democracy and this idea that it's being taken away or I guess challenged. I think people forget that it's been around for a while. It's been around a while because of its imperfections.
Well, even the framers, I believe it was Benjamin Franklin who even said, that keeping the republic together. Remember, it was formed as a republic.
That's right.
But there's debate right now. Is it still a republic, or is it now a corporation? And all that's happened in the history of America. It's evolving, and one thing that I think we're all aware of is that change is a constant. There's always going to be change, and how do we adapt to it? But you've got to. I really think that we have to go back to the Constitution. There's been many attempts nowadays, I believe, even in the educational system, in trying to take history and rewrite it as they see it now, and make it relevant to their narrative and what they would like to see happen. But if you go away from the very basis of the founding of America, its Constitution, the ideals of what the framers had in mind, and we move away from that, then America as we know it is no longer the America it once was. It is now evolving into something different. And I see it moving more towards a socialist, democratic, liberal, socialist nation.
And that's going to translate into changes for Guam, because obviously
absolutely.
From 1950 and the way that the leaders at the time wanted to see us as a part of the American family, that could shift tectonically as well, right?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we're still considered an unincorporated territory. We are a possession of this republic. We are possession of this corporation, if you will, and so Guam's role. I mean, that's why I was interested in running for Congress at one time, was to see if we could begin to develop this dialogue and begin to make policy changes necessary. We can't do it on our own. I felt that it's something that it had to be a cohesive and a cooperative effort between all the territories in one voice, Guam, the Sinai, American Samoa, Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, to come together and then develop relationships with the states that have influence over our future. So in any relationship, it always requires work, and that's what Congressman Nicholas now is tasked to do, is not only policies that affect our government and the finances, but our relationship with the United States and how can we make it mutually beneficial.
Thank you, former Governor Camacho. Such a privilege to spend time with him for this episode. That's it. That's all. Bonus. If you enjoyed this podcast, download, press subscribe, or follow us right now. More great content is on the way. Talk to you soon.
The That's It, That's All podcast is produced by Sean Gumataotao. Executive producer is Trisha Gumataotao. Hit the subscribe or follow button and leave a review. Thanks for listening.